She rejected the millionaire's kiss until his jealous confession made her heart melt. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She should have known the day would end badly when her coffee machine decided to break at 6 a.m. Sasha Kurt stood in her compact but well-appointed Harlem apartment, staring at the lifeless espresso machine that had been her morning companion for 3 years. Her rich mahogany skin caught the early sunlight streaming through the large windows, highlighting the elegant curve of her cheekbones and the determined set of her jaw. At 27, she had learned that small disasters often preceded larger ones. Her natural hair was pulled back into a low bun, a few rebellious curls framing her face despite her attempts at perfection. She wore a tailored navy blazer over a crisp white blouse, the kind of outfit that commanded respect in the glass towers of Manhattan. Everything about Sasha Kurt was intentional, from her understated gold jewelry to the confident way she carried herself, as if she belonged in every room she entered. "Great," she muttered, grabbing her leather bag and checking her phone. 3 missed calls from her assistant, and 2 urgent emails marked with red flags. The Meridian Tech presentation was today, and she was already running behind. The subway ride to Midtown was a blur of morning commuters and the familiar rhythm of the city waking up. Sasha found herself thinking about the project that had consumed her life for the past month, a complete rebranding campaign for one of the company's biggest clients. It was the kind of assignment that could make or break careers, and she knew exactly why it had landed on her desk. She was good, damn good, and everyone knew it. The elevator in the Sterling Tech building carried her to the 42nd floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park. The office buzzed with its usual energy. Developers hunched over multiple monitors, account managers juggling phone calls, and the ever-present hum of innovation that made New York's tech scene legendary. "Sasha, thank God you're here," called Miranda, her assistant, practically jogging to catch up. "Mr. Cole wants to see you in his office now." Sasha's stomach tightened. Julian Cole didn't summon people to his office for casual conversations. At 38, he was the youngest CEO in the company's history, having transformed a mid-level tech firm into a billion-dollar empire in less than a decade. The business magazines called him a visionary. The gossip blogs called him dangerously handsome and perpetually single. Sasha called him trouble, the kind she'd spent years learning to avoid. She knocked twice on the mahogany door before entering. Julian's office was a study in controlled power. Minimalist furniture, abstract art, and technology seamlessly integrated into every surface. He stood with his back to her, looking out at the city skyline, his broad shoulders filling out a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "You wanted to see me?" Sasha kept her voice steady, professional. He turned, and she felt that familiar, unwelcome flutter in her chest. Julian Cole was the kind of man who stopped conversations when he walked into a room. 6'2" with an athletic build that spoke of disciplined gym sessions, he had the kind of classical features that belonged in old Hollywood: strong jawline, piercing blue eyes, and dark hair that always looked perfectly tousled. But it was something else that made him dangerous, the way he looked at people as if he could see straight through their carefully constructed walls. "Sasha." His voice carried a slight rasp that made her name sound different somehow. "Please sit." She chose the chair farthest from his desk, crossing her legs and maintaining eye contact. Years of working in male-dominated spaces had taught her the importance of claiming her space. "The Meridian presentation is this afternoon," Julian said, settling into his chair with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to being watched. "I'm sure you're ready." "Of course." She waited. Julian Cole didn't call meetings to confirm what he already knew. "I'm taking over as the lead on this project." The words hung in the air between them. Sasha felt her carefully maintained composure crack just slightly. "Excuse me. The client specifically requested that I personally oversee the final phase. It means we'll be working closely together for the next few weeks." He leaned forward, his blue eyes studying her reaction. "Late nights, weekend sessions, probably some travel. Is that going to be a problem?" A dozen responses flashed through Sasha's mind, most of them unprofessional. She had spent 3 years building a reputation for excellence while maintaining careful distance from Julian Cole and his notorious charm. Now he was asking her to work side by side with him, night after night. "Of course not," she heard herself say. "I'm committed to delivering the best possible results for our client." Something flickered across his features. Amusement, perhaps, or challenge. "I was hoping you'd say that." He stood and moved to the window, and Sasha caught herself noticing the way his suit jacket emphasized his lean waist. She quickly looked away, focusing on the city beyond the glass. "There's something else," Julian said without turning around. "The client wants to see some unconventional approaches. They're looking for authenticity, real emotional connection. I think your perspective could be exactly what this campaign needs." "My perspective? You see things differently, Sasha. You always have." He finally turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "That's why I need you on this." The word need seemed to echo in the silence that followed. Sasha stood, smoothing down her skirt with hands that were steadier than she felt. "I'll have my team ready for the transition meeting," she said, moving toward the door. "Sasha?" She stopped, her hand on the door handle, but didn't turn around. "This is going to change everything." She turned the handle and stepped into the hallway, her heart racing for reasons she refused to acknowledge. Behind her, she could feel Julian's eyes following her every step. As she walked back to her office, Sasha couldn't shake the feeling that Julian Cole hadn't been talking about the campaign at all. The presentation had gone better than anyone expected, but Sasha knew the real work was just beginning. At 8:30 p.m., the Sterling Technology building had emptied except for the cleaning crew and the soft glow emanating from Julian's corner office. Sasha sat across from him at the large conference table they'd commandeered, laptops open, takeout containers scattered between them like evidence of their dedication. "The client loved the emotional angle," Julian said, loosening his tie for the first time all day. The simple gesture made him look more human somehow, less like the untouchable CEO, and more like a man who'd been working for 12 straight hours. "But they want to see how we execute it." Sasha nodded, pushing a forkful of pad thai around her container. She'd changed from her blazer into a soft cream sweater that brought out the warmth in her dark skin, though she'd kept her hair in its professional bun. "The challenge is making luxury technology feel accessible without losing the aspirational element." "Exactly." Julian's blue eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm she'd only seen him display in boardrooms. "Most campaigns either talk down to people or make them feel excluded. We need to find the middle ground." "The sweet spot," Sasha agreed, surprised by how naturally they'd fallen into sync. She'd expected working with Julian to be complicated. Power plays, ego clashes, the uncomfortable dance of maintaining professional boundaries with someone who made every room feel smaller just by being in it. Instead, she found herself genuinely engaged. Julian listened when she spoke, built on her ideas rather than dismissing them, and had insights that challenged her thinking in ways that made the work better. "Tell me something," Julian said, leaning back in his chair. "What made you want to work in communications?" The question caught her off guard. In 3 years at Sterling Tech, no one had asked her that. "Why do you want to know?" "Because the best campaigns come from personal truth. If I'm going to understand your perspective, I need to understand what drives you." Sasha studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or casual interest. Instead, she saw genuine curiosity. "I grew up watching my grandmother build a small catering business from nothing. She understood people, what they needed, what they wanted, what would make them feel seen. Every event she did told a story. And you want to tell stories too." "I want to make people feel something real," she said, surprised by her own honesty. "Too much marketing treats people like demographics instead of human beings." Julian was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming silently on the table. "That's exactly what this campaign needs." Something in his tone made her look up. He was watching her with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of how alone they were, how the city lights beyond the windows created an intimate cocoon around their shared workspace. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting the attention back to him. "What made you want to build an empire?" A shadow crossed his features. "Who says I wanted to build an empire?" "Every business magazine in the country." "Business magazines don't know everything." Julian stood and walked to the window, his hands in his pockets. "I started this company because I wanted to prove something to myself. The empire part, that just happened." "Prove what?" He was quiet for so long that Sasha thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "That I could build something that mattered, something that would last longer than the people who created it." The vulnerability in his admission caught her completely off guard. This wasn't the Julian Cole she'd observed from a distance, the confident CEO who commanded boardrooms and graced magazine covers. This was someone who understood the weight of legacy, the fear of being forgotten. "And have you," she asked quietly, "proved it?" Julian turned from the window, and for a moment their eyes met across the conference table. "I'm still working on it." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Sasha couldn't quite name. Then Julian's phone buzzed, breaking the spell. "My driver's here," he said, checking the message. "I can drop you at the subway." "That's not necessary." "It's almost 10 p.m., Sasha. I'm not letting you take the subway alone this late." She wanted to argue, to maintain her independence, but the practical part of her brain acknowledged that a ride would get her home faster. "Fine, thank you." They gathered their things in comfortable silence, the easy rhythm they'd established during their work session, carrying over into the simple tasks of packing laptops and clearing the table. In the elevator, Sasha found herself stealing glances at Julian's reflection in the polished steel doors. The town car was waiting outside, sleek and black, with windows tinted dark enough to hide secrets. Julian held the door for her, and as she slid across the leather seat, she caught a hint of his cologne, something expensive and subtly masculine that made her think of late nights and whispered conversations. "Where to?" Julian asked, as the car pulled into traffic. Sasha gave the driver her address, then settled back into the seat, trying to ignore how close Julian was sitting, how the dim interior lighting cast shadows across his strong profile. "So," Julian said, breaking the silence, "tomorrow we start the creative brief. Are you ready for this to take over your life for the next few weeks?" Sasha turned to look at him, struck by something in his tone. "Are you asking as my boss or as my project partner?" "I'm asking as someone who's about to spend a lot of time with you." His blue eyes found hers in the dim light. "I want to make sure you know what you're getting into." The car slowed as they approached her building, a well-maintained brownstone in a tree-lined block of Harlem that she'd fallen in love with the moment she'd seen it. But Sasha didn't move to get out immediately. Instead, she found herself studying Julian's face in the shadows. "I can handle working with you, Julian," she said finally. "The question is whether you can handle working with someone who won't just say yes to everything you suggest." A slow smile spread across his features, the kind that probably made investors write checks and competitors nervous. "I'm counting on it." Sasha reached for the door handle, but Julian's voice stopped her. "Sasha!" She turned back, her hand still on the handle. "Thank you. For tonight, for making this feel like collaboration instead of just another project." The sincerity in his voice made something flutter dangerously in her chest. "See you tomorrow, Julian." As she walked up the steps to her building, Sasha could feel his eyes on her back through the car window. Only when she heard the town car pull away did she allow herself to acknowledge the truth she'd been fighting all evening. Working with Julian Cole wasn't going to be the problem. Wanting to work with him again was. 3 days of working together had taught Sasha 2 things. Julian Cole was brilliant, and he was nothing like what she'd expected. The coffee shop on 42nd Street had become their unofficial second office. Tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing boutique, Brew and Bean was the kind of place where struggling artists typed novels on laptops and business executives pretended they weren't checking emails every 30 seconds. Sasha had discovered it during her first week at Sterling Tech, drawn by the exposed brick walls and the way afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows. Now at 11 a.m. on a Thursday, she sat across from Julian at their usual corner table, watching him sketch campaign concepts on napkins with the focused intensity of someone who'd forgotten the world existed beyond their immediate task. "What if we flip the whole narrative?" Julian said, his pen moving across the paper in quick, confident strokes. He'd rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt, and Sasha found herself momentarily distracted by his forearms. Strong, with a dusting of dark hair and the expensive watch that caught the light when he moved. "Flip it how?" she asked, pulling her attention back to the napkin sketches. "Instead of selling the technology, we sell the moment after. The relief when something just works. The joy when a family connects across continents. The confidence when you're not struggling with complicated interfaces." Sasha leaned forward, her excitement building. "Emotional payoff instead of feature lists." "Exactly." Julian looked up from his sketching, and their faces were suddenly closer than she'd realized. Close enough that she could see flecks of silver in his blue eyes, close enough to notice the slight scar above his left eyebrow that no magazine photo had ever captured. She should have pulled back. Instead, she found herself studying his face with the same intensity he brought to everything else. "You have a scar," she said without thinking. Julian's hand automatically went to his eyebrow. "Skiing accident when I was 12. My brother dared me to take a trail I wasn't ready for." "You have a brother?" Something shifted in Julian's expression. "Had. Daniel died in a car accident 3 years ago. The simple words carried such weight that Sasha felt her breath catch. Julian, Don't, he said quietly. I didn't tell you for sympathy. I told you because you're the first person I've worked with who looks at me like I'm just a person instead of a title. The vulnerability in his admission made Sasha's chest tighten. She'd spent so much energy maintaining professional distance that she'd never considered what it might feel like to be Julian Cole, to have every interaction filtered through assumptions about wealth and power. Is that why you work so much? She asked softly. Because of Daniel. Julian was quiet for a long moment, his fingers absently turning his coffee cup. He was supposed to take over the company someday. He was better with people than I am, more patient. He would have been a better leader. So you're living for both of you. I'm trying to build something he would have been proud of. The honesty in his voice made Sasha's careful walls crack just a little. She reached across the table without thinking, her fingers covering his hand briefly before she caught herself and pulled back. I'm sure he would be proud, she said. What you've built is extraordinary. Julian looked at her with surprise, as if kindness was something he didn't expect. You really think that? I think you've created something that employs thousands of people, that pushes technology forward, that makes people's lives better. That's not nothing, Julian. That's everything. For a moment, the busy coffee shop faded away. There was only Julian's intense blue gaze and the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. Then Julian's phone buzzed with an incoming call, breaking the spell. I should take this, he said, glancing at the screen. But first, dinner tonight? We need to finalize the creative direction, and I know a place that's quiet enough for us to actually think. Sasha hesitated. Dinner felt different from coffee meetings and late nights in the office. Dinner felt dangerously close to something that wasn't entirely professional. Just work, Julian added, as if reading her thoughts. I promise. Okay, she heard herself say, but somewhere casual. I don't need another reminder of how different our worlds are. A smile tugged at the corner of Julian's mouth. I know just the place. He answered his phone and stepped outside, leaving Sasha alone with her thoughts and the lingering warmth where his hand had been under hers. Through the window, she watched him pace the sidewalk, one hand gesturing as he spoke, completely unconscious of the way women walking by slowed their steps to get a better look. Julian Cole was beautiful, brilliant, and completely out of her league. But more dangerous than any of that was the growing certainty that underneath the CEO exterior, he was also kind. When he came back inside, his expression had shifted back to business mode. Change of plans, he said, pocketing his phone. The client wants to move up our timeline. We need to have preliminary concepts ready by Monday. That's 3 days, Sasha said, her mind already calculating the work involved. I know, which means this weekend is going to be all about the campaign. Julian sat back down, but the easy intimacy of their earlier conversation had been replaced by focused intensity. Are you free Saturday? I'll make myself free. Good. My place has better resources than the office, and we won't have any interruptions. He paused, studying her face. Unless that makes you uncomfortable. The idea of spending Saturday in Julian's personal space should have made her uncomfortable. The fact that it didn't was what worried her. I can handle it, she said, echoing her words from the car ride. I'm beginning to think you can handle anything, Julian replied, and something in his tone made her pulse quicken. As they gathered their things to head back to the office, Sasha couldn't shake the feeling that agreeing to spend Saturday at Julian's apartment was either the best decision she'd made in years or the most dangerous, possibly both. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made New York feel like anything was possible. Sasha stood outside Julian's building in Tribeca, a converted warehouse that rose 30 stories into the Manhattan sky, all glass and steel and understated elegance. The doorman had directed her to the private elevator that would take her directly to the penthouse, and she was beginning to understand exactly how different their worlds really were. She dressed carefully. Dark jeans, a soft burgundy sweater, and ankle boots that were comfortable enough for a long day of work, but still made her feel confident. Her hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, a departure from her usual professional updo that felt both liberating and slightly dangerous. The elevator opened directly into Julian's apartment, and Sasha stepped into a space that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Hudson River and New Jersey beyond. The interior was minimalist but warm. Rich hardwood floors, carefully curated artwork, and furniture that managed to be both expensive and inviting. You made it, Julian's voice came from the kitchen area, and when Sasha turned, she nearly forgot how to breathe. Gone was the impeccable business attire she was used to seeing him in. Instead, Julian wore dark jeans that fit him perfectly, and a grey Henley that clung to his athletic frame in ways that made her very aware of the broad shoulders and lean waist she'd only guessed at beneath his suits. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and he was barefoot. He looked like a man comfortable in his own space, and somehow more dangerous for it. "This is—" Sasha gestured around the apartment, searching for words that wouldn't reveal how impressed she was. "Too much?" Julian asked, genuine concern in his voice. "Beautiful," she said honestly, "but not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Sasha considered the question, walking toward the windows that dominated the living space. "Something colder, more like a hotel than a home." "This used to be Daniel's place," Julian said quietly, joining her at the window. "I kept most of his things when I moved in. He always said homes should feel lived in, not displayed." The admission made Sasha turn to study Julian's profile as he looked out at the city. "You miss him?" "Every day." Julian's voice was soft, almost lost in the morning light streaming through the windows. "But enough about that. Coffee? I actually have a decent machine. Please. And thank you for letting me come here instead of going back to the office." "Thank you for trusting me enough to come." The simple words carried weight that made Sasha's pulse quicken. She followed Julian to the kitchen, which was a study in modern efficiency, marble countertops, professional-grade appliances, and a coffee setup that would make any barista jealous. "How do you take it?" Julian asked, already pulling expensive-looking beans from a cabinet. "Strong and black. A woman after my own heart." The casual comment hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Julian busied himself with the coffee preparation, and Sasha found herself watching the easy way he moved through his space, the unconscious confidence of someone completely at home. "So," she said, settling onto a bar stool at the kitchen island, "where do we set up our war room?" Julian gestured toward a set of glass doors that led to what looked like a home office. "Dining room table is big enough to spread everything out. Plus, it has the best light." 20 minutes later, they were surrounded by laptops, sketches, printouts, and empty coffee cups. The dining room table had been transformed into command central for the Meridian campaign, and Sasha had to admit that Julian was right about the workspace. Natural light flooded the room, and the view was inspiring rather than distracting. "Okay," Julian said, spreading out the concept boards they'd been developing all week. "We have 3 directions. Which one feels right to you?" Sasha studied the layouts, her professional mind automatically evaluating color schemes, typography, and messaging, but she found herself distracted by Julian's proximity as he leaned over the table beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with the crisp scent of his soap. "This one," she said, pointing to the middle board. "It's emotional without being manipulative, aspirational without being exclusive." "My thoughts exactly." Julian's hand brushed hers as he reached for the board, and neither of them pulled away immediately. "But how do we execute it?" The client wants to see video concepts, social media integration, the whole ecosystem. For the next 3 hours, they lost themselves in the work. Ideas flew back and forth, building on each other's suggestions, pushing concepts in directions neither had considered alone. Sasha watched Julian sketch out storyboards with quick, confident strokes, his brow furrowed in concentration, completely absorbed in the creative process. This was a side of Julian she'd never seen, not the polished CEO or the charming public figure, but the person who'd built a company from nothing because he genuinely cared about creating something meaningful. "We need food," Julian announced around 2 o'clock, stretching in his chair. "There's a great deli down the street, or I could order something." "Actually," Sasha said, standing and walking to the kitchen, "what do you have here? I cook when I need to think." Julian followed her, looking slightly bewildered. "You want to cook? Here. Is that okay?" She was already opening his refrigerator, pleased to find actual ingredients instead of takeout containers. "I think better when my hands are busy." Yes, of course, I just didn't expect." Sasha turned to find Julian watching her with something like wonder in his expression. "What? No one's cooked in this kitchen since Daniel lived here." The admission made Sasha pause, her hand on the refrigerator door. "We don't have to—" "No," Julian said quickly. "I'd like that. I'd really like that." An hour later, they sat at the kitchen island sharing a simple meal of pasta, with fresh vegetables and herbs Sasha had found in Julian's surprisingly well-stocked kitchen. She'd tied her hair back with a band from her purse and rolled up her sleeves, and Julian hadn't been able to stop watching her move around his space with easy confidence. "This is incredible," Julian said, twirling pasta around his fork. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother, mostly. She believed food was love made visible." Sasha took a sip of the wine Julian had opened, something expensive that paired perfectly with their simple meal. "What about you? Do you cook?" Julian's laugh was rueful. "I can make coffee and order takeout. Daniel was the cook in the family. He sounds like he was a good man. The best." Julian's voice was soft with memory. "He would have liked you." The simple statement hit Sasha harder than she expected. There was something about the way Julian said it, with such certainty that made her chest tighten with emotions she wasn't ready to name. "How can you be sure?" Julian set down his fork and looked at her directly, his blue eyes serious. "Because you make people feel seen. Daniel always said that was the rarest gift, making someone feel like they matter." The intensity of his gaze made Sasha's breath catch. They were sitting close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his eyes, close enough to notice the way his lips curved slightly when he was thinking. "Julian," she started, not sure what she was going to say. His phone rang, shattering the moment. Julian glanced at the screen and sighed. "I should take this, client emergency." He stepped into the living room to answer, leaving Sasha alone with her racing heart and the growing certainty that spending the day in Julian's world had been exactly as dangerous as she'd feared. When he returned 10 minutes later, his expression was apologetic but focused. "We need to pivot," he said. "The client wants to see a completely different approach, something more traditional." Sasha felt her heart sink, but she nodded professionally. "Then we pivot." As they gathered their materials and prepared for another long afternoon of work, Sasha couldn't shake the feeling that the phone call had been more than just a professional interruption. It had been a reminder of all the reasons why letting herself feel anything for Julian Cole was a mistake she couldn't afford to make. The final presentation was scheduled for Thursday, which meant Wednesday night found them back in Julian's office at nearly midnight, surrounded by the debris of their creative process. Sasha rubbed her eyes, feeling the weight of too many late nights and too much coffee. They'd been working together for 2 weeks now, and somewhere between brainstorming sessions and shared meals, the careful professional distance she'd maintained had begun to crumble. "I think we have it," Julian said, leaning back in his chair and running his hands through his hair. "The campaign feels right." "It does," Sasha agreed, looking at their final presentation boards with satisfaction. They'd created something beautiful together, a campaign that was both emotionally resonant and strategically sound. "The client is going to love it. We make a good team," Julian said quietly, and something in his tone made Sasha look up from her laptop. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, intense but soft, as if he was seeing something that surprised him. The office lights had been dimmed hours ago, leaving them in the warm glow of desk lamps and the city lights beyond the windows. "We do," she said carefully, suddenly aware of how alone they were, how intimate the space felt with just the two of them, and the quiet hum of the building's night systems. Julian stood and walked to the window, his hands in his pockets. "Sasha, I need to tell you something." Her heart rate quickened. "What?" "These past 2 weeks." He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression made her chest tighten. "Working with you has been the best part of my day, every day." "Julian, let me finish." He stepped closer, and Sasha found herself standing without conscious thought, drawn by the intensity in his blue eyes. "I know this complicates things. I know you probably think I'm just another executive who can't keep business and personal separate, but I've never felt this way about anyone I work with." "How do you feel?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like you see me," he said simply. "Not the CEO, not the money, not the image, just me." They were standing close now, close enough that Sasha could see the exhaustion around his eyes, the slight stubble that shadowed his jaw at this late hour, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I see you," she confirmed, her heart racing. "But Julian, this is complicated. You're my boss. There are rules." "Forget the rules," he said softly, his hand reaching up to cup her cheek. "Just for tonight, forget everything except this." His thumb traced along her cheekbone, and Sasha felt her careful resolve crumbling. She'd spent 2 weeks watching Julian be brilliant and kind and unexpectedly funny. She'd seen him vulnerable and strong and completely different from every assumption she'd made about him. "I can't forget," she whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. "My career, my reputation. I would never let anything happen to your career," Julian said fiercely. "You're the most talented person I've ever worked with. That has nothing to do with this." "Then what is this?" Julian's other hand came up to frame her face, his forehead almost touching hers. "I don't know," he admitted. I just know that when I'm with you, everything else fades away. The pressure, the expectations, the loneliness I didn't even realize I was carrying. With you, I feel like I can breathe." Sasha closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words, the sincerity in his voice. When she opened them again, Julian was looking at her like she was something precious, something he was afraid to break. "Sasha," he breathed, and she could feel his breath against her lips. The moment stretched between them, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. Sasha could feel herself balanced on the edge of a decision that would change everything. Julian's eyes searched hers, asking a question she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. Then he began to lean forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she found herself rising on her toes, drawn by the magnetic pull of something she'd been fighting for weeks. Their lips were almost touching when Sasha's phone buzzed loudly on the desk behind them, the sound cutting through the silence like an alarm. They sprang apart as if burned, the spell broken by the harsh intrusion of the outside world. Sasha's phone continued to buzz insistently, and she stumbled backward, her hand pressed to her mouth as if she could still feel the phantom pressure of his lips. "I should," she gestured toward her phone, her voice shaky. "Of course," Julian said, his own voice rough. He turned away, giving her privacy, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched at his sides. The text was from her roommate, asking if she was okay since it was so late. A simple check-in that felt like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. "I should go," Sasha said, gathering her things with hands that weren't quite steady. "Sasha, wait." Julian turned back to her, his expression uncertain. "About what just happened?" "Nothing happened," she said quickly, too quickly. "We're tired, we've been working long hours. People make mistakes when they're exhausted." Something flickered across Julian's features. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. "Is that what it was, a mistake?" Sasha paused at the office door, her hand on the handle. She could feel Julian watching her, waiting for an answer that would determine everything that came next. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I can't afford to find out." She left before he could respond, but as the elevator carried her down to the lobby, Sasha couldn't escape the feeling that she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. In his office, 30 floors above, Julian stood alone among the presentation boards that represented their successful collaboration, wondering how something that felt so right could be so completely wrong. The presentation was a triumph, but Sasha felt like she was performing in someone else's life. Thursday afternoon found them in Sterling Tech's main conference room, facing a table full of Meridian executives who were practically glowing with enthusiasm for the campaign concepts. The creative boards looked even better under the professional lighting, and their video mock-ups played flawlessly on the large screen. "This is exactly what we envisioned," the Meridian CEO said, shaking Julian's hand with obvious satisfaction. "Emotional, authentic, but still aspirational. When can we move to full production? We can have a timeline to you by Monday," Julian replied smoothly, every inch the confident executive who commanded boardrooms and closed multi-million-dollar deals. Sasha smiled and nodded at the appropriate moments, answered questions about implementation strategies, and accepted congratulations on their innovative approach. But all she could think about was the careful distance Julian had maintained all day, professional, polite, and completely different from the man who had almost kissed her 18 hours ago. "Excellent work, both of you," Julian said, as the Meridian team filed out of the conference room. His tone was perfectly appropriate, his smile professionally warm. "Sasha, could you handle the follow-up documentation? I have another meeting in 5 minutes." "Of course," she replied, matching his formal tone, even as something twisted painfully in her chest. Julian left without another word, and Sasha found herself alone in the conference room, staring at the presentation materials that represented their successful collaboration, and wondering why victory felt so much like loss. The rest of the week passed in a blur of professional courtesy and careful avoidance. Julian was polite during their necessary interactions, complimented her work in front of other colleagues, and maintained exactly the kind of appropriate distance that Sasha had told herself she wanted. So why did it feel like punishment? Friday evening found Sasha at Meridian, a small wine bar in the village that her friend Cleo had insisted would cure whatever was making her look like someone stole her favorite coffee mug. The place was intimate without being romantic, exposed brick walls, dim lighting, and enough background conversation to provide privacy without isolation. "Okay, spill," Cleo said, settling into the booth across from her with a glass of red wine. At 29, Cleo Morrison was a successful graphic designer with an uncanny ability to read people and zero patience for emotional denial. "You've been weird all week. What happened with the mysterious CEO?" "Nothing happened," Sasha said, the same words she'd been repeating to herself for days. "The presentation went well, the client loved our work, and now we're back to our normal professional relationship." "Uh-huh." Cleo's dark eyes narrowed with skepticism. "And that's why you look like someone cancelled Christmas?" Sasha took a larger sip of wine than strictly necessary. "It's complicated. The best things usually are." Cleo leaned forward, her voice gentle but insistent. "Sasha, I've known you for 5 years. You don't get weird about work stuff unless it's not really about work. So what's really going on?" For a moment, Sasha considered deflecting again, but the wine and Cleo's concerned expression and the weight of keeping everything inside for days finally broke through her defenses. "I think I'm falling for him," she admitted quietly, "and I think he feels something too, but it's impossible. He's my boss. She gestured helplessly. "He's Julian Cole." "The Julian Cole who looks at you like you hung the moon?" Sasha's head snapped up. "What? Girl, I've seen the way that man watches you at company events. Like you're the only person in the room." Cleo's smile was knowing. "The question isn't whether he's interested. The question is what you're going to do about it." "Nothing," Sasha said firmly. "I'm going to do nothing. It would be career suicide. Or it could be the best thing that ever happened to you." "Cleo, I'm serious. When was the last time you let yourself really feel something for someone? When was the last time you took a risk that mattered?" The question hit harder than Sasha expected. She thought about Marcus, her last serious relationship, which had ended 2 years ago when she'd realized she felt more obligation than passion. She thought about the careful walls she'd built around her heart, the way she'd learned to protect herself from disappointment. "I can't," she said finally. "There's too much at stake." "There's always too much at stake," Cleo replied gently. "That's what makes it worth it." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the bar, laughter and the clink of glasses that suggested a celebration in progress. Sasha glanced over and felt her heart stop. Julian stood at the bar with 3 other men, all of whom looked like they'd stepped out of a business magazine. He was laughing at something one of them had said, his head thrown back in genuine amusement, and he looked more relaxed than she'd seen him all week. He also looked devastatingly handsome, in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that clung to his athletic frame in ways that made Sasha's mouth go dry. "Well, well," Cleo murmured, following her gaze. "Speak of the devil." As if he'd heard them, Julian turned, and his eyes found Sasha's across the crowded bar. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just that connection, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. Then one of his companions said something that drew his attention back, and the spell was broken. "He's coming over," Cleo whispered urgently. "What? No, he's not." But Julian was indeed making his way through the crowd toward their booth, leaving his friends at the bar with promises to return shortly. "Sasha," he said when he reached their table, his voice carefully neutral, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Julian," she struggled to match his casual tone. "This is my friend Cleo. Cleo, Julian Cole, the famous CEO," Cleo said with a smile that was just slightly too knowing. "Sasha's told me so much about you." Julian's eyebrows rose slightly. "All good things, I hope." "The very best," Cleo replied, then stood abruptly. "And that's my cue to visit the ladies' room." "Lovely meeting you, Julian." She disappeared before either of them could protest, leaving Sasha alone with Julian and the weight of everything they hadn't said to each other all week. "May I?" Julian gestured to Cleo's abandoned seat. Sasha nodded, not trusting her voice. Julian slid into the booth across from her, and suddenly the intimate lighting that had seemed cozy with Cleo felt dangerous. "How are you?" he asked quietly. "Fine. Good. The follow-up with Meridian is going smoothly." "I wasn't asking about work." The simple statement hung between them, loaded with everything they'd been avoiding. Sasha met his eyes and saw her own confusion reflected there, the same mixture of want and uncertainty that had been keeping her awake at night. "I'm confused," she admitted finally, "about what happened, about what it means." "It means," Julian said carefully, "that I can't stop thinking about you, about that moment in my office, about what might have happened if your phone hadn't—" "Julian," his name came out as a whisper. "I know you think it would be complicated," he continued, his voice low and intense. "I know there are 100 reasons why it doesn't make sense, but Sasha, what I feel for you, it's not going away." Sasha felt her carefully constructed defenses crumbling. It can't go anywhere. Why not? Because you're you and I'm me. Because office relationships never work. Because I've worked too hard to risk everything for what? Julian leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. For the chance to be happy. The question hit her like a physical blow. Was that what she was doing? Choosing safety over happiness? Choosing fear over the possibility of something extraordinary? Before she could answer, Julian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and sighed. "My friends are wondering where I disappeared to," he said, but he made no move to leave. "Sasha, I want you to know that what happened in the office, it wasn't a mistake for me. Maybe it was the first honest thing I've done in years." He stood, then paused beside the booth. "When you're ready to stop running from this, let me know." He walked away, leaving Sasha alone with her racing heart and the growing certainty that she was already in far deeper than she'd ever intended to be. Monday morning brought news that changed everything, though not in the way Sasha expected. "They want to expand the campaign," Julian announced during the team meeting, his voice carrying the controlled excitement of someone who'd just landed a major victory. "Meridian is so impressed with our work that they're asking us to develop concepts for their entire product line. It's a 3-year contract worth $30 million. The conference room erupted in applause, and Sasha found herself genuinely smiling for the first time in days. Whatever was happening between her and Julian personally, professionally, they had created something extraordinary. "There's more," Julian continued, his eyes briefly meeting hers across the table. "They want to announce the partnership at their annual gala next Friday. It's their biggest event of the year. Investors, media, industry leaders. We'll need our A-team there." After the meeting dispersed, Sasha was gathering her notes when Julian approached her desk. "How about Friday?" he said quietly. "I know events like this aren't usually your thing, but your presence would mean a lot to the client, and to me." Before Sasha could respond, a familiar voice interrupted them. "Sasha, Kurt? Is that really you?" She turned to find herself face to face with David Henderson, a man she hadn't seen in over 2 years. Tall and lean with warm brown skin and an easy smile, David had been her graduate school study partner, her friend, and for one brief, complicated semester, something more. "David," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "What are you doing here?" "Consulting work," he replied, his smile widening. "Your company hired my firm to handle some data analysis for the Meridian project. I was hoping I'd run into you." Sasha was aware of Julian standing beside her, his presence suddenly tense in a way that made her skin prickle with awareness. She turned to make introductions. "Julian, this is David Henderson from Apex Analytics. David, this is Julian Cole, our CEO." The two men shook hands, and Sasha couldn't help but notice the way they sized each other up. Julian with his natural commanding presence, David with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned his success through brilliant analytical work. "Impressive campaign," David said to Julian, though his eyes kept drifting back to Sasha. "The emotional storytelling approach is exactly what technology companies need right now. Very innovative." "We have an exceptional team," Julian replied, his tone perfectly professional but somehow cooler than usual. "Sasha in particular has been instrumental in developing the creative direction." "That doesn't surprise me," David said, turning his full attention to Sasha. "She always was the most talented person in our program. Are you free for lunch? I'd love to catch up, and I have some insights about Meridian's data patterns that might be useful for the expanded campaign." Sasha felt caught between the two men, aware of the undercurrents flowing beneath their polite conversation. Yes, lunch would be fine." "Excellent." David's smile was genuinely warm. "There's a great place I discovered on 47th Street. Noon work for you?" After David left with promises to text her the restaurant details, Sasha found herself alone with Julian, who was studying her with an unreadable expression. "Old friend?" he asked casually, but there was something sharp beneath the words. "Grad school," Sasha replied, not sure why she felt the need to explain. "We studied together. He seems fond of you." The comment hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them was ready to address directly. Before Sasha could respond, Julian's assistant appeared with a stack of documents that required his immediate attention. "Enjoy your lunch," Julian said, his tone carefully neutral as he walked away. 3 hours later, Sasha found herself at Bistro Laurent, a charming French restaurant that felt intimate despite the lunchtime crowd. David had chosen well. The atmosphere was sophisticated but comfortable, the kind of place where conversation flowed as easily as the wine he'd ordered. "You look incredible," David said, raising his glass in a toast. "Success suits you." Thank you. Sasha touched her glass to his, genuinely happy to see an old friend despite the complicated timing. How long has it been? 2 years. 2 years, 3 months. David's smile was rueful. Not that I was counting. They spent the first hour catching up on careers and mutual friends, falling back into the easy rapport that had made them such good study partners. David had built his analytics firm from nothing, specializing in consumer behavior patterns for major corporations. His work was fascinating, and Sasha found herself genuinely engaged in their conversation. I have to ask, David said as they shared a dessert, are you seeing anyone? The question caught Sasha off guard, though she probably should have seen it coming. It's complicated. It's always complicated with you, David said with a laugh. Remember when you said the same thing about us? That was different. Was it? David leaned forward, his expression growing serious. Sasha, I've thought about you a lot over the past 2 years. About us. About the timing that was never quite right. Sasha felt a familiar warmth toward David, the affection of shared history, mutual respect and genuine friendship. He was a good man, brilliant and kind, the type of person her mother would approve of and her friends would love. He was also everything that Julian Cole wasn't, uncomplicated, available, and completely separate from her professional world. David, I know we said we'd stay friends, he continued, but seeing you today, I can't help wondering if maybe the timing is finally right. Before Sasha could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it automatically and felt her heart skip. Julian, hope you're enjoying lunch. Don't forget about the budget review at 3. It was a perfectly professional message, but something about it felt loaded with subtext. David noticed her distraction. Work? He asked. My boss, Sasha replied, putting her phone away. He's very involved in the details. The CEO who introduced us? He seems intense. He is. David studied her face with the perceptiveness that had made him such a good analyst. Is he the complication? Sasha met his eyes, seeing genuine concern and something that might have been hope. David represented safety, familiarity, the possibility of something real without the risk of professional suicide. I don't know, she said honestly. Well, David said, signaling for the check, when you figure it out, I'll be here. I'm in town for the next few weeks on this consulting project. As they walked back toward Sterling Tech, David's hand occasionally brushing hers as they navigated the crowded sidewalks, Sasha caught herself wondering if choosing the safe path might not be the worst thing in the world. They were saying goodbye in the lobby when the elevator doors opened and Julian stepped out. His eyes immediately found Sasha, then moved to David standing close beside her, and something flickered across his features that made Sasha's breath catch. David, Julian said with a polite nod, thank you for joining us for lunch consultation. My pleasure, David replied smoothly. Sasha and I had a very productive conversation. The word choice felt deliberate, and Sasha saw Julian's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. I'm sure you did, Julian said. Sasha, when you have a moment, I'd like to review those budget projections. Of course, she replied, hyper-aware of the tension crackling between the two men. David pressed a business card into her hand. My personal number's on there, he said quietly. Call me if you want to continue our conversation over dinner. As the elevator doors closed behind Julian, leaving Sasha alone in the lobby with David's card in her hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just become the center of a competition she'd never intended to enter. Later that evening, as she sat in her apartment staring at David's card and thinking about the look in Julian's eyes when he'd seen them together, Sasha realized that running from her feelings for Julian Cole might have just gotten infinitely more complicated. The Meridian Gala was the kind of event that made Manhattan feel like a glittering stage, and Sasha had never felt more out of place. The Metropolitan Museum of Art had been transformed into an elegant wonderland for the evening. Crystal chandeliers casting warm light over cocktail tables, string quartet music floating through the Egyptian wing, and some of the most powerful people in technology mingling beneath priceless artifacts. Sasha stood near the Temple of Dender, wearing a midnight blue gown that Cleo had insisted she buy for occasions exactly like this. The dress was elegant, without being flashy, a sleek silhouette that skimmed her curves and brought out the richness of her skin tone. She'd left her hair down in soft waves, and the simple diamond earrings that had been her grandmother's graduation gift caught the light as she moved. She felt beautiful, but she also felt like she was playing a role in someone else's life. You look stunning, David's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. He looked handsome in his black tuxedo, every inch the successful consultant who belonged at events like this. "Thank you," she said, accepting the champagne. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Meridian invited our entire consulting team," David explained, moving to stand beside her as they watched the elegant crowd. "Perks of the expanded contract, though I have to admit, I was hoping you'd be here." They'd spoken twice since their lunch earlier in the week, friendly conversations that had reminded Sasha why she'd been drawn to David in graduate school. He was brilliant, funny, and completely straightforward about what he wanted. No games, no complications, no risk of professional disaster. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" David asked quietly, his shoulder brushing hers as they watched couples dancing on the marble floor near the reflecting pool. Before Sasha could answer, she caught sight of Julian across the room and her breath caught in her throat. He was magnificent in his black tuxedo, moving through the crowd with the natural confidence of someone who commanded rooms like this regularly. But it wasn't his appearance that made her heart race. It was the way he carried himself, the genuine warmth in his interactions with clients and colleagues, the way he made everyone around him feel important. As if sensing her attention, Julian looked across the room and their eyes met. Even from a distance, Sasha felt the familiar flutter in her chest, the magnetic pull that had been growing stronger every day, despite her best efforts to ignore it. Julian excused himself from his conversation and began moving through the crowd toward them. "Your boss is coming over," David observed, following her gaze. "He's been watching you all evening." "Has he?" Sasha tried to keep her voice casual, but her pulse was already quickening. "Sasha," Julian said when he reached them, his voice carefully controlled. "David, I'm glad you could make it tonight." "Wouldn't miss it," David replied smoothly. "Sasha was just telling me how impressive the turnout is." Julian's eyes flicked between them, and Sasha caught something dark in his expression before he masked it with professional courtesy. "It's an important night for the company, for all of us who worked on the campaign." "Speaking of which," David said, taking a step closer to Sasha, "I was just asking Sasha if she'd like to dance. The music is beautiful." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sasha felt trapped between the 2 men, aware of the undercurrents flowing beneath their polite conversation. She could see the tension in Julian's jaw, the way his hands clenched slightly at his sides. "I'd love to," she heard herself say, though she wasn't sure if it was the right choice or the safe one. David offered his arm with a triumphant smile, and as they moved toward the dance floor, Sasha could feel Julian's eyes burning into her back. The waltz was slow and elegant, and David was a good dancer, leading her smoothly around the marble floor. Other couples swayed around them, corporate executives and their wives, tech entrepreneurs and their partners, the kind of powerful people who shaped industries and economies. "You're tense," David murmured as they turned near the reflecting pool. "It's been a long week," Sasha replied, trying to focus on the music instead of the way Julian was watching them from across the room. "Is it the work or is it him?" The direct question caught her off guard. "David, I can see the way he looks at you, Sasha, and the way you look at him." David's voice was gentle but serious. "If there's something there, I need to know." Sasha met his eyes, seeing the sincerity and concern of someone who genuinely cared about her. David deserved honesty, even if she wasn't sure what the truth was anymore. "It's complicated," she said finally. "It always is with you," David replied with a rueful smile. "But Sasha, office relationships, they're risky, especially with someone like him. The power dynamic, the potential for things to go wrong. I know all the reasons why it's a bad idea." "Then let me give you one reason why this might be a good idea," David said, spinning her gently as the music swelled. "I care about you. I always have. And I'm offering you something real, something that won't put your career at risk." The song was ending, and as the last notes faded, David pulled her closer. "Think about it, Sasha. Think about what you really want." He leaned down as if to kiss her cheek in thanks for the dance, but at the last moment, Sasha turned slightly, and their lips met in a brief, soft kiss that was more friendly than passionate, but unmistakably intimate. When they broke apart, Sasha's eyes immediately sought Julian across the room. What she saw made her heart stop. Julian was standing frozen near the champagne table, his face a mask of controlled fury and something that looked dangerously close to pain. For a moment, their eyes locked across the elegant crowd, and Sasha felt like she'd been physically struck by the intensity of his reaction. Then Julian turned and walked quickly toward the museum's exit, disappearing into the New York night. "I should go," Sasha said breathlessly, stepping away from David. "Sasha, wait!" But she was already moving through the crowd, following the path Julian had taken. She found him on the museum's grand steps, his hands braced against the stone railing as he stared out at Central Park. "Julian," she called softly. He didn't turn around. "Enjoying the party?" The coldness in his voice made her flinch. "It's not what you think, isn't it?" Julian finally turned to face her, and the raw emotion in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "Because what I think is that I just watched the woman I'm falling in love with kiss another man." The words hit Sasha like a physical blow. "Julian, no, let me finish." He stepped closer, his voice rough with emotion. "I've tried to respect your boundaries, Sasha. I've tried to be professional, to give you space, to pretend that what I feel for you doesn't exist. But watching him touch you, watching you smile at him, watching you kiss him," Julian's voice broke slightly, "it's killing me. I didn't mean for you to see that. That's not the point." Julian's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his voice. "The point is that I can't pretend anymore. I can't watch you choose someone else when what we have is what?" Sasha whispered, her heart racing. "Everything," Julian said simply. "You're everything, Sasha, and I'm terrified that I'm going to lose you to someone who can offer you an easier path." The vulnerability in his admission broke something open in Sasha's chest. This wasn't the controlled CEO or the charming public figure. This was a man who was completely, devastatingly honest about what he felt. "Julian," she breathed, rising on her toes as he leaned down. This time there was no phone to interrupt them, no reason to pull away. When their lips met, it was with all the pent-up longing and denied attraction of the past weeks. Julian kissed her like a man who'd been holding his breath and could finally breathe again, and Sasha found herself kissing him back with an intensity that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me this is real," he whispered. "Tell me I'm not imagining this." "It's real," Sasha confirmed, her voice shaky with emotion. "But Julian, it's also impossible. My career, your reputation, the company. I don't care about any of that," Julian said fiercely. "I care about you, I care about us." "But I have to care," Sasha replied, even as her heart was screaming at her to throw caution to the wind. "I've worked too hard to get where I am to risk it all for love," Julian finished quietly. The word hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they were ready to cross. "I need time," Sasha said finally. "I need to think." Julian studied her face in the soft light from the museum, then nodded slowly. "Take all the time you need, but Sasha?" "Yes?" "Don't take so long that we lose this. Some things are worth the risk." As they stood on the museum steps with the glittering lights of Manhattan spread out before them, Sasha realized that Julian Cole wasn't just asking her to take a risk on love. He was asking her to take a risk on herself. 3 days after the gala, Sasha found herself sitting in her favorite coffee shop at 6 in the morning, staring at 2 business cards on the small wooden table. One belonged to David Henderson, with his personal number written in careful script on the back, along with a message, "When you're ready to stop running toward complications." The other was Julian's business card, which she'd had for months but never really looked at. Tonight she noticed how the expensive cardstock felt between her fingers, how his name was embossed in subtle silver lettering that caught the morning light. The weekend had been torture. Julian had given her space, just as he'd promised, but his absence felt like a physical ache. No late-night work sessions, no shared coffee runs, no moments of stolen glances across conference tables. The professional distance she'd thought she wanted felt like punishment. "You look like someone trying to solve the mysteries of the universe," Cleo's voice interrupted her thoughts. Sasha looked up to find her friend sliding into the opposite chair, 2 large coffees in hand. "How did you know I'd be here?" "Because when you're spiraling, you always come to the same place at the same ungodly hour." Cleo pushed one of the coffees toward her. "Plus, you've been ignoring my texts since Friday night. Spill." Sasha took a grateful sip of coffee, then found herself telling Cleo everything. The gala, the kiss with David, Julian's confession, the impossible choice she was facing. "So let me get this straight," Cleo said when she finished. "You have 2 men interested in you. One is safe, stable, and won't complicate your career. The other is the love of your life, but comes with professional risks." "I never said Julian was the love of my life." Cleo raised an eyebrow. "Honey, you didn't have to. It's written all over your face every time you say his name." "It doesn't matter what I feel," Sasha said, her voice strained. "You know what happened to Carmen in marketing when she dated that director. She got transferred to a different department, then quietly pushed out 6 months later. I can't afford that kind of setback. Carmen's situation was different. She was dating her direct supervisor, and he was married. Cleo leaned forward, her expression serious. Sasha, what if you're not choosing between safety and risk? What if you're choosing between settling and living? Before Sasha could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from David. Coffee later. I have news that might interest you. David, Cleo guessed, reading her expression. He wants to meet. Sasha stared at the message, then looked back at Julian's business card. Maybe I should hear what he has to say. Or maybe you should stop running from what you really want. But Sasha was already typing a response to David, agreeing to meet him at lunch. Some decisions were too important to make based on feelings alone. 2 hours later, she sat across from David in the same restaurant where they'd had lunch the week before. He looked confident, almost excited in a way that made Sasha nervous. I have a proposition, David said without preamble. My firm is opening a New York office permanently. They want me to head it up, build a team from scratch. David, that's amazing. Congratulations. There's more. He leaned forward, his eyes bright with possibility. I want you to come work with me. Head of client relations, full partnership track, complete creative control over our communication strategies. And Sasha, the money, it's triple what you're making now. Sasha felt her breath catch. It was an incredible opportunity. Everything she'd worked toward in her career, wrapped up in a package that would solve all her current problems. I don't know anything about analytics consulting, she said weakly. You know about people, you know about stories, that's what we need. David reached across the table and covered her hand with his. And personally, I know we could build something amazing together, both professionally and personally. It was a perfect solution. A fresh start, a new career trajectory, and a relationship with someone who understood her ambitions without threatening them. So why did it feel like accepting would be the biggest mistake of her life? I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. But Sasha, don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often. As David walked her back to Sterling Tech, Sasha felt like she was moving through a dream. In the span of one lunch, her entire life had been reorganized into neat, logical possibilities. The elevator ride to her floor felt endless. When the doors opened, she stepped into the familiar chaos of Sterling Tech's communications department and immediately spotted Julian standing near her desk, talking quietly with her assistant. He looked up as she approached, and the careful professional mask he'd been wearing for days slipped just enough for her to see the raw hope and fear in his blue eyes. Miranda was just updating me on the Meridian timeline, he said carefully. Everything is moving smoothly. Good, Sasha replied, hyper-aware of her assistant watching their interaction with obvious interest. That's good. Julian nodded, then started to walk away, but halfway to the elevator, he stopped and turned back. Sasha, could I see you in my office? There are some budget items we need to discuss. She followed him to the elevator in silence, the familiar tension crackling between them. When the doors closed, Julian didn't press a button immediately. How was your lunch? He asked quietly. Fine, good. Sasha stared at the elevator buttons, unable to meet his eyes. David had some interesting news. I'm sure he did. Something in Julian's tone made her look up. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides, and she realized he already knew somehow. Julian, he offered you a job, Julian said flatly. Partnership track, probably significant money, a chance to start fresh somewhere that doesn't have complicated CEO problems. How did you... Because it's exactly what I would do if I were trying to win you. Julian's voice was rough with emotion. Smart, logical, removes all the obstacles between you. The elevator reached his floor, but neither of them moved when the doors opened. Is it working? Julian asked quietly. His strategy? Sasha met his eyes, seeing her own confusion and longing reflected there. I don't know. Sasha. Julian stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the exhaustion around his eyes. Before you make any decisions, I need you to know something. What? I talked to HR this morning about disclosure policies, conflict of interest protocols, everything. If there was an us, there are ways to handle it professionally. Transparency requirements, ethics board review, but it's not impossible. Sasha felt her heart stop. You talked to HR about us? I talked to HR about possibilities, Julian corrected, because I needed to know if there was a path forward that wouldn't destroy your career, because losing you professionally would be devastating, but losing you personally would be... He stopped, running a hand through his hair. It would break me, Sasha. The vulnerability in his admission made her chest tighten. Julian, I can't ask you to risk your reputation. You're not asking. I'm choosing. Julian cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. I'm choosing you, Sasha. The question is whether you'll choose me back. Before she could respond, the elevator doors started to close. Julian reached out to stop them, and the mundane action somehow broke the spell. I need time, Sasha whispered, echoing her words from the museum steps. I know, Julian replied, his hands dropping to his sides. But whatever you decide, decide for yourself. Not because it's safe, not because it's logical, but because it's what you want. As the elevator doors closed between them, Sasha realized that Julian Cole had just done something no man had ever done before. He'd fought for her without trying to make the choice for her. That evening, sitting in her apartment with David's offer letter on one side and Julian's business card on the other, Sasha finally understood what Cleo had been trying to tell her. She wasn't choosing between two men. She was choosing between two versions of herself. Tuesday evening found Sasha standing outside Sterling Tech at 9 p.m., staring up at the single light glowing in Julian's corner office, 42 floors above. She'd spent 3 sleepless nights, weighing her options, making lists of pros and cons, analyzing every angle of her impossible situation. David's offer letter sat signed on her kitchen table, ready to be delivered. Her resignation letter was drafted, but not printed. She'd made the logical choice, the safe choice, the choice that every rational part of her brain insisted was correct. So why was she standing on the sidewalk instead of going home to pack? The security guard recognized her and waved her through to the elevator. As the floors ticked by, Sasha's heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't told Julian she was coming. She wasn't even sure what she was going to say when she saw him. The communications floor was dark except for the emergency lighting, but she could see the glow from Julian's office spilling into the hallway. As she walked toward it, her heels clicking on the polished floor, she caught sight of him through the glass walls. Julian sat behind his desk, still in his dress shirt and tie despite the late hour, completely absorbed in whatever he was reviewing on his laptop. His hair was mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it, and there was something about his posture, the set of his shoulders, the intensity of his focus, that made her chest tighten with affection. She knocked softly on the doorframe, and Julian's head snapped up, surprise flashing across his features when he saw her. Sasha! He stood immediately, his blue eyes searching her face. What are you doing here? I needed to see you, she said, stepping into his office and closing the door behind her. I needed to tell you something. Julian's expression grew carefully neutral, as if he was bracing himself for bad news. Okay, I'm leaving Sterling Tech. The words hung in the air between them, and Sasha watched Julian's face go through a series of emotions. Surprise, hurt, and finally a kind of resigned acceptance that broke her heart. David's offer, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. It's an incredible opportunity. Partnership track, creative control, triple the salary. Sasha moved closer to his desk, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. It solves everything. Everything, Julian repeated, his voice flat. My career concerns, the complications of working together, the risk to both our reputations. Sasha took a shaky breath. It's the smart choice. Julian nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. Then I'm happy for you. You deserve every success, Sasha. You deserve everything you've worked for. The gracious response made tears prick at her eyes. Even now, even when she was breaking his heart, Julian was thinking about what was best for her. There's something else, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. David asked me to marry him. This time, Julian couldn't hide his reaction. Pain flashed across his features so quickly that she almost missed it before he recovered his composure. Congratulations, he said, the words sounding like it had been torn from his throat. I said no. Julian's head snapped up, confusion replacing the careful neutrality in his expression. What? I said no, Sasha repeated, stepping around his desk until she was standing directly in front of him. I said no, because sitting there looking at this man who could give me everything I thought I wanted, all I could think about was you. Julian stared at her, not daring to move, as if any sudden action might shatter the moment. I kept thinking about the way you sketch ideas on napkins when you're excited, Sasha continued, her voice growing stronger, about how you remember that I take my coffee black, and how you always make sure I eat when we're working late, about the way you talked about your brother, and how you've spent 3 years building something he would be proud of. Sasha, I'm not finished. She reached up and cupped his face, feeling the slight roughness of stubble against her palms. I kept thinking about how you make me laugh, how you challenge me to be better, how you see me in ways I didn't even see myself, about how safe I feel with you, and how alive you make me feel at the same time. Julian's hands came up to cover hers, his eyes bright with something that looked dangerously close to hope. But mostly, Sasha said, her voice breaking slightly, I kept thinking about how much I love you, how completely, terrifyingly, irrevocably in love with you I am. The words seemed to hit Julian like a physical blow. His eyes closed for a moment, and when he opened them again, they were filled with tears. Say it again, he whispered. I love you, Sasha said, the words coming easier now that they were finally free. I love you, Julian Cole, and I'm tired of running from it. Julian pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. I love you too, he said, his voice rough with emotion. God, Sasha, I love you so much it terrifies me. So what do we do now? She asked. How do we make this work? Very carefully, Julian said with a shaky laugh, and very honestly. No secrets, no hidden relationships, complete transparency with HR and the board. And if they don't approve? Julian's hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she'd started crying. Then we'll figure it out, together. Because I'm not losing you again, Sasha. I can't. The gossip, the speculation about why I got promoted, will die down when everyone sees how brilliant you are, Julian said firmly. When they see that you earned every opportunity through your own talent and hard work. And if it doesn't? If people always wonder? Julian was quiet for a moment, considering her question with the seriousness it deserved. Then we prove them wrong. Every day, with every project, with every success. We show them that what we have makes us stronger, not weaker. Sasha studied his face, seeing not just love but determination, partnership and respect. You really think we can do this? I think, Julian said, leaning down until his lips were almost touching hers, that we can do anything together. When he kissed her, it was different from their desperate kiss on the museum steps. This was a kiss of certainty, of choice made freely and without reservation. It was a kiss that tasted like promises and possibilities and the future they were choosing to build together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julian rested his forehead against hers. So, he said with a smile that made her heart skip, does this mean you're not taking David's job? This means, Sasha said, matching his smile, that I'm exactly where I want to be, complicated though it may be. I love your complications, Julian murmured against her lips. Good, Sasha replied, because I'm pretty sure we're about to create a few more. As they stood together in Julian's office, surrounded by the glittering lights of Manhattan and the promise of everything they were brave enough to reach for, Sasha realized that sometimes the scariest choice was also the rightest one. Sometimes love was worth the risk. Sometimes the leap of faith was exactly what you needed to learn you could fly. Paris, 2 years later. The terrace of the Georges V Hotel offered a breathtaking view of the Eiffel Tower, but Sasha couldn't focus on anything except the man sitting across from her at the intimate table for two. 2 years had changed everything, and nothing at all. Julian still sketched ideas on napkins when he was excited, though now they were often scribbled on linen napkins in Michelin-starred restaurants, rather than paper ones from coffee shops. He still remembered how she took her coffee, still made sure she ate when they worked late, still looked at her like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. But there were changes too. Confidence had settled into the space where uncertainty used to live. Their love had deepened from desperate attraction into something steadier, stronger, partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the kind of trust that could only come from weathering storms together. You're thinking very seriously for someone on vacation in Paris, Julian observed, reaching across the small table to take her hand. I'm thinking about how far we've come, Sasha replied, intertwining their fingers. 2 years ago, I was convinced that loving you would destroy my career. And now I'm the youngest VP in Sterling Tech's history, leading a department that's grown by 300%, with a reputation that has nothing to do with who I'm sleeping with and everything to do with the campaigns we've created together. Julian's smile was proud and just a little smug. I told you they'd see your brilliance. It hadn't been easy. The first few months after their relationship became official had involved more scrutiny than Sasha had ever experienced. Board meetings where she'd had to defend every decision, colleagues who questioned whether her rapid advancement was merit-based, industry publications that speculated about the power couple of tech communications. But Julian had been right. Excellence was its own defense. The campaigns they'd developed together had won awards, driven revenue, and elevated Sterling Tech's brand to new heights. Slowly, the whispers had died down, replaced by respect for what they'd accomplished professionally. Personally, the journey had been even more rewarding. Living with Julian in his Tribeca penthouse had taught Sasha that love didn't have to mean losing herself. Julian encouraged her ambitions, celebrated her successes, and created space for her to grow in ways she'd never imagined possible. "Earth to Sasha," Julian said with a laugh, squeezing her hand gently. "You're doing that thing where you disappear into your own head." "Sorry." She focused on his face, noting how relaxed he looked in the soft Parisian evening light. "I was just thinking about Daniel." Julian's expression softened. Over the past 2 years, Sasha had learned to read the subtle changes in his demeanor whenever his brother was mentioned. The sharp pain had mellowed into something gentler, love mixed with acceptance, and the kind of peace that came from knowing she was living a life that would make Daniel proud. "What about him? I think he would have liked this," she said, gesturing to the romantic setting, the city spread out below them, the obvious contentment between them. "I think he would have liked us." "I know he would have loved you," Julian said quietly. "You're exactly the kind of woman he always told me I needed to find. Strong enough to challenge me, smart enough to keep up with me, stubborn enough to not let me get away with anything." "Stubborn?" Sasha raised an eyebrow with mock indignation. "Gloriously, wonderfully stubborn," Julian clarified, bringing her hand to his lips to press a soft kiss to her palm. The gesture was casual, comfortable, the kind of intimate touch that had become second nature between them. But tonight, something felt different. There was an energy around Julian, a barely contained excitement that made Sasha study his face more carefully. "Julian," she said slowly, "why are we really in Paris? Can't a man take the woman he loves on a romantic vacation without ulterior motives?" "This man can," Sasha replied, "but this woman knows when you're planning something. You get this look." "What look?" "The same look you had before you surprised me with that weekend in the Hamptons, and before you arranged for my grandmother to fly in for my birthday, and before you—" Okay, Julian laughed, standing abruptly from his chair. "You know me too well." He moved to stand behind her chair, his hands settling on her shoulders as they both looked out at the Eiffel Tower, now beginning to sparkle with its hourly light show. "Sasha," Julian said, his voice suddenly serious, "do you remember what you said to me that night in my office when you told me you loved me?" "Which part?" "The part about how I made you feel safe and alive at the same time." Sasha leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against her shoulders. "I remember. You do the same thing for me," Julian continued, his voice soft but intense. "Before you, I was successful, but not really living. I was building an empire, but not a life. You changed everything, Sasha. You made me remember what it felt like to hope for something beyond the next quarterly report." Julian moved away from her, and when Sasha turned in her chair to face him, her breath caught in her throat. He was on one knee beside their table, a velvet box in his hands, his blue eyes bright with love and nervousness in equal measure. "Julian," she whispered, her heart racing. "I lost you once because of pride," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion she could see in his expression. "I spent weeks thinking I'd missed my chance with the most extraordinary woman I'd ever met. I won't make that mistake again." He opened the box to reveal a ring that was perfectly Sasha, elegant but not ostentatious. A classic solitaire setting with a stone that caught the light from the Eiffel Tower and threw rainbows across the white tablecloth. "Sasha Kurt," Julian said, and his voice broke slightly on her name. "You are my partner in every sense of the word. You challenge me, inspire me, and love me better than I ever knew was possible. You've made me a better man, a better leader, and definitely a better human being." Tears were streaming down Sasha's face now, but she couldn't look away from Julian's earnest expression. "I want to spend the rest of my life building dreams with you, facing whatever comes next together, and loving you with everything I have." Julian's voice was strong now, certain. "Will you marry me?" For a moment the terrace was silent except for the distant sounds of Paris below and the beating of Sasha's heart. She looked at Julian, this man who had started as an impossibility and become her everything, and felt the same certainty she'd experienced that night in his office 2 years ago. "Yes," she said, her voice clear despite her tears. "Yes, Julian Cole, I will marry you." The smile that spread across Julian's face was brighter than the Eiffel Tower's lights as he slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly. Then he was standing, pulling her into his arms, spinning her around the small terrace as she laughed through her tears. When he set her down, they were both breathing hard, both grinning like teenagers, both completely overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd just promised each other. "I love you," Julian said, cupping her face in his hands. "I love your ambition and your kindness and your terrible habit of stealing all the covers. I love the way you think and the way you argue, and the way you make me want to be worthy of you every single day." "You already are worthy of me," Sasha replied, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "You've been worthy of me since the moment you chose to fight for us, instead of trying to control me." They kissed then, soft and deep and full of promise, while the lights of Paris twinkled around them and the future stretched out before them like an adventure they couldn't wait to begin. Later, as they walked hand in hand along the Seine, Sasha couldn't help but think about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, so afraid of taking risks, so convinced that love and career couldn't coexist, so determined to choose safety over possibility. "Regrets?" Julian asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Just one," Sasha said, looking up at him with a smile. "I wish I'd been brave enough to love you sooner." "We had exactly the timing we needed," Julian replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We needed all those weeks of fighting it to appreciate what we found when we stopped running." As they paused on a bridge overlooking the river, Sasha realized he was right. Their love story hadn't been a fairy tale. It had been better. It had been real, complicated, earned through honesty and compromise and the daily choice to show up for each other. "So," Julian said, leaning against the bridge railing and pulling her close, "any thoughts on when you'd like to become Mrs. Cole?" "Soon," Sasha said without hesitation. "I've waited long enough to start forever with you." Julian's answering smile was everything she'd ever wanted to see: joy, love, and the promise of all the tomorrows they would build together. In the distance, the Eiffel Tower began its midnight light show, casting sparkles across the water like scattered dreams made manifest. And for the first time in her life, Sasha Kurt felt completely, perfectly, extraordinarily home. Sometimes the greatest risk is not taking one at all. Sasha and Julian's journey reminds us that true love requires us to be vulnerable, to choose authenticity over safety, and to believe that we deserve happiness even when it comes with complications. Their story shows us that the walls we build to protect our hearts often become the very barriers that keep us from the love we're meant to find. When we have the courage to let someone see us completely, our fears, our dreams, our imperfections, we discover that love isn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone who chooses us every day, exactly as we are. What did this story teach you about the courage it takes to choose love over fear? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.